We now call the meeting to order. If you could please pay attention to Councilmember Emerson for the invocation, to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise if you are able.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I have a gentleman tonight here to deliver the invocation. You guys have probably seen this gentleman here a lot, and he actually has had impressive credentials throughout his life. First as a United States Marine, and then as a lawyer, and then as an MPA, Master's in Public Administration holder from the University of Kansas. However, I'm giving him the toughest assignment yet and asking him to deliver our invocation. So, Mr. Ledbetter, could you please come up? And 4 minutes, sir.
Well, this is quite an honor. I've been asked to say grace before. My sons thought I was a preacher, but I have never been a preacher. So anyway, if you'll bow your heads. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this night. Thank you for our government. Thank you for this city, this capital city. And I ask that you bless the council members and mayor tonight as they make decisions, and our staff as we debate the great issues of this city and the things that confront us, and help us to solve problems with great wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this point, we are moving into the roll call, if the clerk would call it.
Mayor De Laisla.
Here.
Council members Hiller.
Here.
Clear. Here. Ortiz. Here. Emerson.
Here.
Padilla.
Here.
Jensen.
Present.
Mays.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Lester.
Here.
Having the roll call, we now move on to the consent agenda, if the clerk would read.
A is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout approving the issuance of a special event retailer's permit for Hy-Vee Incorporated for the Country Stampede event at Heartland Motorsports Park. B is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing the city clerk to issue a special event retailer's permit for the Country Stampede event at Heartland Motorsports Park. C are minutes of the regular meeting of June 4, 2019, and there's a list of cereal malt beverage applications. Staff is recommending approval.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval by Councilmember Lester. We have a second by Councilmember Cohen. Questions with regards to the agenda? Seeing no questions on the consent agenda, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now start moving into the action items. If the clerk would read action item A.
A is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout amending the district map referred to and made a part of the zoning ordinances by Section 1850-050 of the Topeka Municipal Code by providing for certain changes in zoning on property located at 2715 Southeast Indiana Avenue from O&I 1 Office and Institutional District to M1 2 Family Dwelling District.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have a simple zoning change request that was approved unanimously by the Planning Commission. I'll ask Director Finder to go through the specifics related to this request.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the motion. Good evening, governing body. The proposal tonight to rezone 2715 Southeast Indiana in the Central Highland Park neighborhood involves a property with 2 dwelling units on it, 1 primary, 1 accessory. However, the zoning does not permit that use, and the owners were having issues trying to sell the property, close on it, finance it. So they came to us for a rezoning to change it from office and institutional to 2-family and 1. So now they can complete that sale of the property. It is conforming to the neighborhood plan. It is a mixed-use area. Certainly residential would be in that recommendation. So without any further issues from the neighborhood, in order to further the sale, change of zoning was recommended for approval. I'll stand for any questions and ask for a motion to approve when ready.
We have heard the presentation. Councilman Jensen.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval by Councilman Jensen, a second by Councilman Lesser. Do we have additional questions for Mr. Fyander? Seeing none, we are in the portion of the meeting in which if anybody in the group has received any ex parte communication, has to disclose it. The ex parte communication allows us a chance to disclose if we have had any communication with anybody with regards to this issue, but are still able to make an impartial decision on the matter. So if anybody has had any of the ex parte communication, your time is now to speak.
None.
Seeing none, at this point, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. I've had email and a phone call, and I can make a decision.
Thank you very much. Seeing none others, at this point in time, if there is no further discussion on the item, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item 2 of the action items. Item B, if the clerk would read.
B is a public hearing for the purpose of considering written or oral objections to the proposed assessments on file in the office of the clerk on all lots, parcels, and pieces of ground liable for the cost of improvement, same being Southwest 49th Street and Southwest Winger Road Street, improvement project T701027, and an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout apportioning and levying a special assessment on certain lots and pieces of ground in the city of Topeka, Shawnee County, Kansas for street project T701027, authorized by resolution of advisability and authorization number 8958, adopted and approved October 17, 2017.
City Manager.
Mayor, governing body, tonight we will conduct a public hearing related to this assessment project, and as we do that, depending on comments, we then seek approval from the governing body on the levying of the assessments related to these projects. This was a voluntary assessment project. These individuals signed off to have this project done, and the project is now complete, so that's why the assessments are now being brought forward in the process.
So prior to us opening the public hearing, are there any questions that staff would like to ask? Council would like to ask of staff? Seeing no questions, at this point in time, the public session is open. The public hearing is open, and anybody that would like to speak to this specific item is able to do so. Again, anybody who is interested in speaking to this specific item is welcome to do so. Anybody that is interested in speaking about this specific item is welcome to do so. Having called 3 times and nobody is here representing this specific item, the public hearing is now closed. At this point in time, do we have? We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Lesser. We have a second by Councilmember Emerson. Questions or additional comments? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. At this point, we move on to item C, if the clerk would read.
C is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing initiation of condemnation proceedings to acquire fee title for construction of the Grant Jefferson Pump Station Project Number T291061.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, tonight we are starting this process related to condemnation on this particular piece of property. This will authorize us to begin the process, and so that's the first step of a couple of different steps that are required for final approval.
Do we have questions for the staff with regards to this issue? Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to ask the city attorney if she can give us procedure, and I think we talked about it, Lisa, for eminent domain on what our guidelines are so that everybody gets a clear understanding, and also not just for my fellow council members, but for the public. You know, when people look at this eminent domain, they they frown on it and think you're trying to take their property. And I think we need to make sure that we educate them and it's very clear why we're taking the steps that we're taking. Thank you.
City Attorney?
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, we had discussions and negotiations with the property owner. We're seeking to obtain this property to do a pump station. There were several exchanges of value, and we ultimately had an appraisal done on it. If the governing body approves the resolution this evening, however, and the corresponding ordinance that'll go along with it afterwards, which will be next week on June 18th, the legal department will proceed with filing a petition in district court. And the process after that is that the judge will appoint 3 appraisers who will view the property. They'll hold a public hearing to determine the market value. The property owner, in this case, I believe it's Mr. Lee, will be notified and will have an opportunity to appear at the court hearings as well as the appraisers' hearings and offer any evidence he has as to the value of the property. The appraisers will then issue their report to the judge. And then if he disagrees with the determination made by the appraisers, he has the ability to appeal that determination through the district court. And that's basically the process.
If I may.
Councilwoman Ortiz, yes.
City Attorney, the parameters of taking things by eminent domain is not just because we want to go in and take it. I think that's another part that I wanted to get to.
There has to be a public purpose for it. There's going to be a pump station placed on this particular piece of property.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ortiz. Any other questions or comments for the staff? We have a motion for approval by Councilman Lesser. We have a second by Councilman Jensen. Seeing no further questions, we proceed with the vote.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item D, if the clerk would read.
D is approval of the 2020 transient guest tax allocations in the amount of $2,854,458.
Councilman Cohen. Oh, Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. So the Transient Guest Tax Committee consists of Councilman Emerson, Councilman Padilla, and myself, new committee this year. At our May 21st meeting, we approved this. It is on. We approved this recommended budget. We did have a robust discussion on this. There was a recommendation from staff to basically an amendment that was offered to take $100,000 from Visit Topeka and add that to the general fund to cover the city's cost for events. Ultimately, after the discussion, it was decided that those dollars are probably better well spent in Visit Topeka's budget, so we kept them there. A lot of these things in the budget are already allocated, and so there's not a lot of wiggle room in here. But ultimately, we decided to go with the recommended budget you see today. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Does anybody in the body have any questions for Councilman Mays? Deputy Mayor.
What made you determine that it would be better spent where it is instead of moving it to the city's general fund?
Well, I think a lot of it is because the purpose of the transient guest tax is for tourism. And the way that you get tourism is through organizations like Visit Topeka marketing our city. And that 1% tax, we felt, was not intended to cover, policing of events and water barricades for events and things like that. We felt that the marketing was probably a better place for that money, because it is sort of a self-imposed tax that the hoteliers put on themselves. And they are very adamant that they want that to stay into tourism. The whole purpose of this is to get people into Topeka that are not otherwise in Topeka.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilwoman Ortiz.
Aaron, how much money are we talking about?
The total budget?
No, just the money that you were going to take out.
It was $100,000.
$100,000? Is that Visit Topeka's commercial, that little commercial of the the man and the wife and the 2 kids that go to the zoo?
I believe so.
Because I'm kind of disappointed in that. It's like, is that all we have to do in Topeka is go to the zoo? You know, go, where do they go? Up to the top of the Capitol? And then I'm really, really disappointed that we didn't use anybody from Topeka. Those were paid people that are actors out of Kansas City, so I'm really disappointed. So I really like Wichita's. Have you checked out Wichita's ad? Maybe we can kind of tell them that. I mean, that's really catchy, but they've got to do more advertising. They've got to do more. And I've sat here long enough and I've said that time after time. Not scolding you, I'm just voicing my opinion. So if we're going to give them $100,000, hopefully they'll do a better job and a better ad, because those kids were tired after riding the train, going to the State House, canoeing. That's all we have in Topeka to do. That's really sad. So if we're going to give them that money, if I'm going to vote to give them that money, I want to see a better commercial, and I want to see better things. We have a lot of things in Topeka that we're not promoting. Wanamaker's one of them. Thank you.
Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ortiz, for those recommendations. Unfortunately, the TGT committee does not have a whole lot to do with the specifics of their marketing, but I will say I've climbed to the top of the Capitol a few times, and it is pretty exhausting. So,
Councilmember Padilla.
Thank you, Mayor. Firstly, I want to commend Councilman Mays for chairing the committee. I think he did an excellent job. There were a lot of people there with a lot of different opinions and ideas, and I agree with you, Councilwoman Ortiz. There is a lot more going on in Topeka, and that's at the basis, at the root of why we wanted that money to stay there, because we want that advertising to talk about all those things that are available here in Topeka. As far as who stars in it or not, I think Brendan has put his hand up a couple times. But anyway, but I do think that a robust marketing plan is extremely important. We have an opportunity right now with the Stampede coming to us that this is the best time to start marketing about all those other things that we have here in Topeka right now. So again, I think I commend Councilman Mays for doing a fine job for chairing it. Thank you.
Councilwoman Heller.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. I know there was robust discussion about the alternative proposal for the Visit Topeka money. Was there any discussion about the services that they're delivering or any feedback to them on that?
Councilman Mays.
Councilwoman Hiller, yes, there was a lot of discussion, and a lot of it was, and we did get off topic a few times. You know, we talked a little bit about, we had a breakdown of costs for the individual events, how much they cost individually. I'm sure that could be provided to you if you'd like to see that. We kept hearing about the manning of barricades for parade routes and things like that. So there was discussion about perhaps shortening some of the parade routes. You know, 5Ks and marathons are expensive things to operate. The Spirit of Kansas, because it happens on the 4th of July, we're paying overtime for security staff to be there. I mean, there's for police and fire, I believe, and among others. But you know, there are probably some ways that we could cut costs, but yes, that discussion was had.
Okay, thank you. The reason I brought it up is because as with our city budget, I'm not sure that budget time is the best time for us to give feedback about program and success. And I wondered how much got covered. I too have some feedback in that I don't see anybody from them here tonight, so I guess maybe for the record or whatever. But I think they've made a lot of improvements, but of concern to me is not just the very expensive process of reaching out and marketing to bus tours and to conventions and so on, which is important to us, but as we redo the website and so on, with Country Stampede coming, for instance, I think it's still challenging to go 24/7 to our website and be able to look and figure out what there is to do, whether to bring your family, how you might structure a day, not a pre-planned tour, not or a itinerary, I should say, but just to go look at that. And so it wouldn't cost any more money. It's a matter of approach and maybe priorities internally. But if that kind of thing wasn't discussed, I think we do get emailed or mailed their periodic reports, so we probably all have the data. But I think it would be nice to schedule a time where there was just some feedback about how it's going, that all of us could participate in, or maybe at the committee level, if people knew and there was a chance to visit for those who wanted.
Councilmember Mays, if I may make a recommendation, if this is something that the council would be interested in, it would be nice then if the committee had a meeting with Visit Topeka in which they would agree on which parameters they would bring to the council, and maybe we could do a work session of them presenting to us or sending us a document after you guys meet with regards to their strategy.
I mean, we'd have to consult with them. I'm sure that they would be accommodating. I mean, they've always been, more than willing to meet with all of us on a regular basis, so I don't have any problem with that. You're not recommending that we don't do the budget tonight, though? I think it's important that we go ahead and get this done tonight.
No, not at all. That's an aside. This is an aside.
Okay.
An aside, because I do agree that a lot of times when we're starting to discuss the individuals that we do grants for, we typically discuss them at the budget time. And
Right.
it's nice to once in a while just have that touch base of saying, oh, this is great, this is what we're doing, but the budget season is not, because it's easy to nitpick on things.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I may.
No, please.
No, I don't know if the role of the Transient Guest Tax Committee is necessarily to get into the management of Visit Topeka. I mean, obviously, it's a funding mechanism for them, so we probably want to know what's going on, but, their day-to-day operations, we don't have anything to do with, for the most part, so.
Councilwoman Hiller?
If I may, it's public money. I mean, we go over the social service grants, we go over the various dollars, and just to have some feedback and not put them in a position of needing to just get it one at a time from any of us that have thoughts, and further for us to have the advantage of that, the thoughts and ideas and feedback at one time.
Okay.
So I appreciate that, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Jensen?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just as full disclosure, I am on the Jayhawk Theater Board. However, there's no way that this money can come and personally benefit me, as it's going to a nonprofit that I do not receive payment from. Also, I was not on any of the committees that made the recommendations up to this point, so there is no conflict of interest. Thank you.
So Councilman Mays, is there a motion?
Yeah, I would make a motion to approve this.
We have a motion for approval, a second by Councilman Mays. We have a second by Councilman Padilla. Additional comments or questions on this issue? Was that a hand? Oh, I saw you. Okay. All right. Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now proceed to item E, if the clerk would read.
E is a public hearing for the parties to explain their issues as required by KSA 754332 with regard to the water ASME meet and confer impasse, and a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout to decide settlement of labor agreement impasse with ASME, Council 61, Local 1294, Water Division.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we're here to conduct a hearing on the consideration of the settlement of the labor agreement with ASME Council 61, Local 1294, Water Division. Representatives of the management team are prepared to open the public hearing by providing background material on the meet and confer process, along with a presentation of the fact finder's report and the management team's recommendation. This will be followed by presentation of the union's recommendations, and both city and staff union representatives will stand for questions at any time during the public hearing. Following these presentations, individuals will sign up for public comment may speak, along with other persons who are here who wish to speak to them, per the requirement to notify the city clerk. Does not apply to public hearings, so anyone can participate in the public hearing portion. So at this time, we're prepared to have the city representatives start the process.
Prior to proceeding with this, does anybody in the body have any questions for staff before we go forward with the public hearing? Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, is it anticipated we need to make a decision on these items tonight? Is there anything that's pressing the time on this timeline?
It is presented that you can make a decision tonight. And obviously, as long as this has been going, if you feel comfortable and there is a desire, a motion, a second, and so forth to move forward, we would recommend a decision be made tonight. But obviously, after hearing the information, you have the right to defer to another date if that would be desired. But for us, we look at this as long as it's been going on, if you feel you have the information necessary, it would be desired that a decision would be made tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilwoman Heller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify what we have, we've had a memo from legal for some time with an explanation of the 3 items that were not resolved in the fact-finding hearings and management recommendations. And then with them was an Exhibit A, B, and C, which were the actual, those are the items that we would move to approve
Correct.
or amend.
Yes.
Okay, and could you just clarify the expectation as to whether you're expecting or hoping that we would do them as a joint unit, or whether you were expecting us to go through them one at a time?
I think the expectation is that they would be gone through one at a time, given that one can play off the other related to the second shift, the wage increase, et cetera, because those do factor in, as you'll hear in our presentation, as this management's position. So the expectation is that they would be done one at a time, but they do play to each other as a group.
Thank you, that's helpful. Just needed to get set. Thank you, Mayor.
Seeing no further questions, before the public hearing commences, City Manager, we may proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. The city position will be presented tonight by Kim Seaton, labor attorney with Constagi, Brooks, Smith, and Profit, followed by Nick Hawkins, Deputy Director of Administrative and Financial Services. Kim?
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Kim Seaton. I am outside labor counsel for the city. The purpose of why we're here tonight is pursuant to the provisions of the Kansas Public Employer-Employee Relations Act, or PERA, which in a nutshell sets out a procedure that public employers and unions have to follow when the parties have reached impasse as a result of their meet and confer obligations. So tonight, the city is here to ask that the governing body accept its recommendations to ensure that the Water Division can continue to operate in a safe and fiscally appropriate manner by implementing a second shift for certain Water Division employees during the months of January, February, June, July, August, and September, to provide a total wage package of 11.5% over the 3-year life of the contract, and third, to find that the wage increases for 2018 should be implemented in 2019 rather than be retroactive, particularly as given that we're already halfway through 2019. To better understand how we've arrived here tonight, I want to give you a little bit of a procedural background. The city is a party to a collective bargaining agreement with the Water AFSCME Local 1294, who for purposes of tonight, I'm just going to call them the union. It's much shorter. They represent approximately 75 employees in the Water Division of the Utilities Department. The most recent collective bargaining agreement between the parties expired on December 31st, 2017. In 2017, as preparations were underway to begin to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement, the city and the union commissioned a wage study by an outside third party to review the market wages for positions in the Water Division. The Austin Peters Group was selected to conduct this study, and in late August 2017, they submitted the wage study to the city. Now, I want to be very clear. The only thing that the wage study looked at was base hourly rates. in various cities and municipalities in the surrounding area as compared to the base hourly rates of the employees in the water division. It did not look at any add-on pays. It didn't look at enhancement pays that might exist for those employees, which makes it very difficult to get an accurate and true comparison of any market differential. Nevertheless, the study concluded that the base hourly wage rates for employees in the water division were anywhere from 4 to 27% below market. The city shared the study with the union as the meet and confer sessions were underway in the fall of 2017. Braxton Copley served as the lead negotiator for the city. These meet and confer sessions occurred throughout the fall and the winter of 2017 and into early 2018. Ultimately, the parties met 18 separate times and were able to reach agreement on 20 separate items. However, the parties were very far apart on 11 items, including the several key items which are before you today, and which I will discuss shortly in more detail. On February 18th of 2018, the parties declared impasse after the city had made its last best and final offer. Consistent with the requirements of PIRA, the parties next used a neutral third-party mediator to try and reach an agreement on the outstanding issues. There were 2 separate mediation sessions that took place in May and June of 2018, but unfortunately no agreement was reached. Then the process moves to the next step, which is a hearing before a fact finder. And the parties selected Ronald Ho as the fact finder. The hearing took place on November 18th, 2018, and the parties then get a chance to make written submissions after the in-person fact finding, which we did. On March 26th of this year, the fact finder issued his report and recommendation as to the outstanding issues. Since that time, the city and the union have met even further to attempt to resolve these outstanding issues. And while the parties have reached agreement on several more issues, there are still the 3 outstanding issues that are before you today. I'm going to discuss each of these open items in turn, but the important thing to remember as I discuss them is that all 3 of these issues impact on one another, and none of them can be considered in isolation, but rather as a whole and in consideration for their impact on the water division. So let's talk about the first issue. The first issue before the governing body is that the city asked that the governing body adopt the fact finder's recommendation that a second shift be implemented. Throughout the entire meet and confer process, the city conditioned its enhanced wage proposal on the implementation of a second shift for those employees who work a 5-day work week. Ultimately, the fact finder agreed with the city's proposal. Under the previous collective bargaining agreement, those employees worked on only one shift, which was Monday through Friday, from 7 to 3 p.m. The problem with this is that water main breaks don't only happen between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. As you know from the discussions in 2017 regarding an increase in the water utility rates, the city has an aging water infrastructure. The aging infrastructure, combined with the Kansas climate and Kansas soil, means that the city experiences a significant number of water main breaks each year. In a survey conducted by Utah State, the national average of water main breaks for a city with the same number of miles as Topeka has would be approximately 122 breaks a year. The city of Topeka's average, however, is significantly higher. Overall, Topeka averages 530 water main breaks a year. In 2016, it was 412. In 2017, it was 415, but in 2018, the city topped 800 breaks. The highest number of breaks also occur, as you might imagine, because of the soil during very cold weather and during very hot weather. So the city sees more breaks during the months of January and February, and then June through September. On some occasions, the city can have as many as 12 breaks in the process of being repaired at any one point in time. With only one shift, the city can't stagger start times, and the crew can work significant overtime. There are frequent occasions when distribution employees will work well beyond 24 hours in a row. And in fact, on some occasions, they have worked 48 hours in a row. These employees who are fixing the water main breaks use heavy equipment to repair water mains, including trucks, backhoes, jackhammers, and saws. Tired employees can lead to serious accidents, given the equipment used. A second shift would help stagger the start times, so during those peak seasons, a fresh crew could come in on the afternoon to take over for the first crew or work on other breaks. The city would also be able to see savings on the amount of overtime by implementing a second shift. Even the union itself acknowledged during the fact-finding hearing that the amount of overtime worked by these employees is extraordinary. So after the hearing, the fact finder did recommend the implementation of a second shift, as he too was clearly concerned about the significant amount of overtime and the significant increase in the fatigue-related dangers in operating the heavy machinery, which not only poses a risk of liability for the city, but it also detrimentally affects the health and well-being of the employees. The fact finder agreed with the city's proposal for a second shift to be limited to the months of the highest water main breaks, January, February, and June through September, only 6 months of the year. The second shift also will only be implemented in those weeks when it is truly necessary. Thus, it will not be any different than when the water employees work on a standby crew, which may be called in to come in at any time outside their regularly scheduled workday. In the meet and confer sessions which have taken place since the issuance of the fact finder's recommendation, management and the union have reached agreement on several parameters surrounding the implementation of the second shift, if the governing body adopts the fact finder's recommendation. Those are found in Exhibit A, which is paragraph C of Article 3, Section 2, which you guys have for consideration. In a smaller group setting led by Braxton Coakley on the management side and Pete Voback on the union side, the teams also discussed work rules, which will apply, which will be, if needed, to supplement the contract language. So as to issue 1, the city requests that the governing body adopt the fact finder's recommendation for the implementation of the second shift in accordance with the contract revisions that are set forth in your Exhibit A. Turning to the second issue that is before the governing body, the city recommends that the governing body reject the fact finder's recommendation as to the wage increase and instead adopt the recommendation of the city for an 11.5% wage increase over the life of the contract, which is, I should say, is for 2018, 2019, and 2020. During the meet and confer process, in an attempt to get a second shift, the city presented an enhanced wage proposal above what it initially presented to the union and above what it would have continued to offer had a second shift not been on the table. It's also above what other bargaining units in the city have been offered as part of their negotiations. In total, the city presented a wage package totaling an 11.5% increase over the 3-year life of the contract, and that is the recommendation that the city asks the governing body to adopt. So to explain why the city believes the fact finder's recommendation of a 17% wage increase should be rejected, some background is necessary. As I mentioned earlier, as part of the lead up to the meet and confer process, the city and the union commissioned the wage study conducted by the Austin Peters Group. Again, that wage study only looked at base hourly rates and did not do an analysis of any other type of add-on pay or enhancement pays that exist in our contract. In fact, not only did many of those add-on pays and enhancements exist in the previous contract, but during the meet and confer process, we also arrived at additional or increased add pays and enhancement pays to more closely align the employees with the market study. These things included an increase in the shift differential, an increase in the differential for the hazardous materials certification, and an increase in certain other classifications. Throughout negotiations, the union took the position that the wages needed to catch up with the market study during the life of this collective bargaining agreement, without taking into account any of the pay enhancements, without taking into account any of the add-ons, and without taking into account the financial needs of the city, without taking into account the infrastructure improvements that need to be done, all while at the same time consistently refusing to consider the implementation of a second shift. Ultimately, the wages during this contract were a very complicated issue. While the city initially proposed its 7.5% wage package, which was much more in line with the types of increases that are negotiated with other bargaining units, because the city was going to the union to ask for the second shift, the city worked very hard to come up with a wage proposal that would encompass the operational efficiencies that a second shift would provide, while also taking into account the wage study, while also being mindful of the need to maintain some consistency with other bargaining units across the city. That led to the city's 11.5% wage proposal, which I remind you the city enhanced in an effort to get a second shift, which the union rejected. Tonight, the city asks that in conjunction with the adoption of the recommendation for the second shift, that the governing body accept the city's recommendation for the 11.5% wage increase. While the union and the fact finder recommended a 17% wage increase over the life of the contract, the city asks instead that you accept the 11.5% proposal. And as set forth in your materials, the cost of the 11.5% wage proposal is roughly $383,500 over current costs. If the union's proposal is adopted, that represents another $200,000 more, for a total of over $500,000 over our current costs. That is the difficult presentation presented to you tonight for decision whether such an increase serves the overall public interest. It's the city's position that adopting the 11.5% wage package recognizes the wage study and the need to increase some wages, while at the same time recognizes our need to be fiscally responsible and to be mindful of the wage increases that have been given to other city employees around the city. Had the city never proposed the second shift, its wage proposal would have been more in line with its initial 7.5% proposal, and thus we believe the 11.5% package combined with the second shift is an appropriate increase for the bargaining unit. So now we're going to talk about the third issue that's before you tonight, and that is the city's recommendation that the governing body adopt its recommendation that wage increases should not be retroactive to 2018, but instead start with the first payroll period of 2019. As I said earlier, negotiations for this contract, which still isn't finalized, began in the fall of 2017 and continued into early 2018 before impasse was declared. Then we took the rest of 2018 participating in mediation and going to the fact finding, and we didn't get the fact finder's recommendation until the end of March of this year. It is now June of 2019, 18 months past what would be the beginning of the contract term, or January 1 of 2018. During the fact-finding hearing, the city asked that any wage increase not be retroactive to January 1 of 2018, but instead rather take effect in 2019. While the fact finder did not adopt the city's request as part of his recommendation, he did acknowledge that a wage increase with no retroactivity would be the simplest to implement. And the city asks you to adopt its recommendation to have those wage increases take effect with the first pay period of 2019 rather than make it retroactive. Thus, employees would receive their 2018 and 2019 increases in 2019. And this is important for several reasons. First, the city's wage package was presented and contingent on obtaining a second shift. We don't have a second shift currently. We didn't get a second shift for 2018. No second shift in 2018 means we didn't get the benefit of the operational efficiencies and savings in 2018. While the city acknowledges that if the governing body adopts the second shift tonight, we're still only going to get half of the operational efficiencies for 2019, nevertheless, we're willing to make wages retroactive to the beginning of 2019. A second reason to begin increases in 2019 is to avoid the tremendous administrative burden for the city to go back and recalculate things like overtime and retroactively capers contributions for 2018. This would be a significant burden on the city's human resources and payroll departments, and would require payroll staff to recalculate for each of the approximately 75 bargaining unit members on a payroll by payroll period basis for 2018, what overtime they would have worked, when wage increases would have taken effect, how much that person would have received at the higher wage rate, and then how much of a makeup contribution to capers needs to be made. It also would not take into account any differences worked in overtime that an employee may have had if a second shift had been in place in 2018. For these reasons, the city believes it is more appropriate for the governing body to limit the administrative burden and to recognize the limited 2019 operational efficiencies of the second shift by adopting the city's recommendation to make wage increases effective with the first payroll period of January 2019. Now, before you tonight, the union has also asked the governing body to adopt a recommendation finding that an employee who does not get a step increase due to a disciplinary action in 1 year would get 2 steps the following year if the employee received an overall meets expectations performance evaluation for the previous year. And it's the city's request that the governing body reject this recommendation. Under the existing contract, receipt of an anniversary step increase is contingent on a couple things. It's contingent on the employee meeting certain expectations, including not having certain levels of discipline, and also receiving an overall meets expectation on their previous year's performance evaluation. With this proposal, the union is asking the governing body to adopt a recommendation that restores a step the employee wasn't eligible for. In essence, they're saying that employees are automatically entitled to step increases and that they can only be delayed for a year if there is disciplinary action. This has not historically been the guidance from the governing body, and in essence reinforces the perception that these step increases, which are separate and apart from cost of living increases, are something to which employees have an inherent right. During negotiations, the city proposed removing level 2 discipline as a disqualifier for the step increase. Thus, there's even less of a chance that an employee won't get that step increase, but there should be an expectation for employee performance, and this is one of them. Adopting the union's recommendation diminishes those expectations. It's also my understanding that you've been provided an email from counsel for the union in advance of tonight's hearing that sets out their position, and I'd like to address some of the points that are raised in the email briefly. The union asks that the recommendation regarding the second shift be implemented with certain work rules placed into the contract. That is not something the city asks that the governing body do, and in fact would be contrary to how work rules are normally created and placed as standard operating procedures. These are not things that would normally go into the contract. Yes, these are parameters and work rules that the city and the union have discussed in subsequent meet and confer sessions, but they should not be part of the contract, but instead should be part of the standard operating procedures. In regard to H, which is on page 4 of the union's email, that union and management will mutually work together to implement the second shift and resolve any issues that arise. The union said it's the union's position that the city is not agreeable to having that language in the agreement. And that is true, because that is a limitation on the city's ability for management rights. And this is very general language that has no definitions on what mutually work together will mean or who will decide what does mean to mutually work together. The union and the city and the union have met numerous times. We always work in good faith with the bargaining unit in an effort to reach agreement. So placing that in the contract would be an improper restriction on the city's management rights. The union also claims that statements that were made at the fact-finding hearing regarding whether this was an inability to pay or an unwillingness to pay is dispositive on the issue. To be very clear, our wage proposals were contingent on achieving operational efficiencies in the second shift. Any discussion of an unwillingness to pay was a result of those collective bargaining negotiations and an effort to keep operational efficiencies and to be consistent with the bargaining units in other city units. So to suggest that a statement made that it's an unwillingness rather than an inability means we automatically have to fund fully the wage study, that's simply not correct. Further, there's statements in from Union Council that the wage study is accurate and correct. No one is disputing the underlying validity of the wage study as to base wage rates. As I've said earlier, though, and I don't want to repeat myself ad nauseum, it doesn't look at everything. It doesn't look at add-on pays and enhancement pays that are negotiated as part of our contract and those things that we have already increased as part of the negotiations. The union claims that, unfortunately, it appears the city views the bargaining unit members as employees who do not deserve to be paid a comparable wage for the services they provide. That is wholly inaccurate. Instead, the city firmly believes that the bargaining unit employees should be treated consistently in a manner that is fiscally responsible, that is operationally efficient, and that is consistent with how other city employees are treated. At this time, I believe there's going to be a presentation on the finances, but then I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, we proceed with the finance presentation, and afterwards, I hope that you've been taking your notes so that you have your questions at the end.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I believe Ms. Seaton gave a fairly comprehensive review of the issues before you. In your council packet for this evening, there's a supplemental financial memo that goes into a little bit further detail on the overall costs of both of the proposals before you tonight. On the management side, comprehensively, it is an 11.5% increase over 2017 wages. Under the management's proposal, 2019 would include a 4.5% increase to the pay matrix. That's combining the 2018 and the 2019 increases, with one step occurring at the beginning of the year and then a second step increase occurring on the anniversary of the employee. 2020 includes a 2.5% increase to the pay matrix and a one-step increase occurring on the employee's anniversary date. And on the second page of this memo, there's a table that lays out the overall cost of that. The total increase over 2017 would be approximately $383,000. If no other changes were made to the water fund budget, that would represent a 1.3% increase in rates. Under the fact finder recommendation, it includes retroactive pay for 2018, and that includes a 3.5% increase to the pay matrix, plus a 1% cost of living adjustment and a step increase occurring on the anniversary date of the employee. The recommendation for 2019 and 2020 follows the same package as 2018, except that in 2020 the cost of living adjustment is removed, so it's a 3.5% increase in the step there. If that is implemented with no other changes to the water fund budget, that would represent a 2% increase on water rates. And total, that would be about a little over $600,000 over 2017 wages. Ms. Seaton also talked about the second shift. Also included in this memo is, if that was implemented, an estimate on what the potential overtime savings would be if that was implemented for those 6 months that were mentioned, January, February, June, July, August, and September. It is expected to result in efficiencies and savings in overtime and standby pay. And the time period in which the second shift would be proposed to be run represents about 56% of the overtime that has occurred during the year. Over the last 5 years, averaged a little over $500,000 in overtime for the entire year. During that period, that's the second shift would be implemented. That's about $280,000 on average over the last 5 years. Believe that during a high break season, you're typically running 2 full crews on overtime, dealing with those breaks. If you replaced one of those crews with someone who's working at a regular time during their second shift, it would be approximately, in our estimation, about a 25% savings during that time period in the overtime, which equates to about $80,000 per year in annual savings. And I believe another question that is on here is on the wage estimates. It's on the first page of the memo. If retroactive pay is approved, the impact to the non-base wage benefits, which would be the overtime and the standby pay, if we went back and retroactively applied those rates to the overtime pay, that would represent approximately a $40,000 to $50,000 increase in 2018 for those costs. There was about $600,000 in overtime that was incurred during 2018. Again, a very high break year. If you applied about a 5% increase to that, that would be somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000. So that is a summary of the wage proposal. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them or wait until after the next presentation.
So at this point in time, it is time for the council, if we have any questions of the staff and of the attorneys representing the city, to ask any questions of these individuals. Deputy Mayor.
Okay, first I want to be clear, I have not decided. I wanted to hear everything that was said. I do have questions on, it was stated that the 11% increases would be, yeah, I guess that's you. It would be over 18, 19, and 20, right?
Yes.
However, it's not really, because if you put you're not really going to do 18 because of the second shift. That wasn't in
essence, it would then be
action.
11.5 in 2 years, because the 2018 increase would take effect in 2019. The total package is still 11.5% though.
But that's only because of the second shift that's in, how is that going to happen? Explain that. How are you going to do that in 2 years?
That might actually be a better question for Jackie to explain how it's actually going to work.
The increase to the matrix that we proposed for 2018 would be added to the proposed increase for 2019, and the overall matrix would increase by that amount for those years. So the 4.5% plus the 2.5% across the board matrix, which equals 7, would be a 7% increase to the matrix for 2019, plus the anniversary step in 2019.
So what they're losing is the overtime, any overtime that was worked?
It would not go retroactive to overtime worked in 2018.
Right, so that's what's being left out.
And that is correct, because
Okay.
we are recommending two steps in 19, as well as that 7% across the board adjustment to the matrix.
Okay, and then let me make sure I understand. There's a step, there's a cost of living, and is that it? I mean, is that what they get every year? There's a step in cost of living?
Yes, so the overall, the cost of living is how the entire pay matrix is adjusted, and then the employee, the rate that step that they're currently on adjusts by that percentage. So if we looked at 7%, the whole matrix would adjust by 7%, and then on their anniversary, they would advance one step across the matrix.
Okay, I do have an issue with if there's a discipline and they lose a step, why, and maybe this is for them, why would you think you'd be able to get that back? I mean, that's like giving my child a discipline and going, I'll give it back to you in a month. I mean, that makes no sense. However, as a teacher, we got step raises, and we got them regardless. So I don't know, has that always been the case that the discipline would be a loss of a step, or is there something else that takes place?
So,
and is it like the first write-up, or how does it work?
If they have a verbal, it does not take their step away, but the current contract and several contracts previous to, if there was a written discipline or above, they would not be eligible for their step. During these negotiations, the city actually proposed to make that a bit more lenient and have it only apply to suspension level discipline, losing a step. And that was not an item that we were able to agree to. But this contract has had it losing a step at the written level for terms that precede my tenure here at the city.
And does that happen on the anniversary date?
Yes, it does.
So if but could they get disciplined in March and their anniversary date's in September, and then they lose that step all the way from March to the
To the following September, yes. So if the discipline happened in March and your step was in September, you would not receive a step in September. Presuming that you did not have more
Right,
discipline, you
right.
would receive it the following September.
Okay, let me see if that's all I have. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Additional questions from the council? Councilwoman Ortiz?
This is just one. I wanted to talk about the hours, because I'm sorry, I was looking through here. So one shift would be 7 to 3, is that correct? Is that what I seen in here?
Yes, that's the current shift Monday. For the employees who work a 5-day work week, yes, their shift is 7 to 3.
Okay, and then the 10-day work week, was that 8 to 5? I was trying to look in here, right?
The 10,
10-day,
Second shift?
yeah, second shift.
this, Braxton would be the better person, I'm sorry. I'm
Well,
just gonna
come
keep
on,
calling other
Mr.
people out here.
Copley, get up here.
Thank you. I'm struggling to understand your question about a 10-day work.
Well, I thought I seen that. I'm struggling to get it back up. Okay. So talk to me about the shifts, because
Okay.
I want a second shift. So we have
Currently, water distribution works 7 to 3. That is their standard shift. And then during most of the year, we have a primary crew for standby. And so any break that comes up during the night or after 3 o'clock, the primary crew would work that break. So the primary crew could very easily work from 3 p.m. until the following morning at 7 a.m. Okay? What the second shift is, the proposed hours for that are from 2 o'clock until 10 o'clock. And that would be basically straight time with their shift differential because it starts after noon, so they'd be entitled to a shift differential. But for the most part, that crew would be working straight time from 2 o'clock until 10 o'clock. So basically, the idea is to help us avoid some of the substantial overtime that we have.
What's the differential, Braxton, do you know?
Shift diff is
Was it 10?
currently, I believe it's 70 cents or 75 cents, and we actually have a TA at the table to take that up to $1.
Okay, so if we get a lot of water breaks, so after 10, then they start overtime, right?
Yes, so from 2 to 10, they would no longer be getting standby because that's their working shift. And then any break that's after 10 o'clock, they would then immediately go into their normal standby role, and then they would respond to those so that they would be working all night, and that during that time, they would get their standby. And of course, once they hit 40 hours in the week, they would be getting overtime.
How much savings is that going to save us?
Nick had in his financial memo, basically what we're looking at is potentially 25% of what the average overtime is. So I think that was $80,000 if I remember correctly. That's our projected savings. And again, that's looking at a crystal ball saying how much would I possibly get in this situation because there are just so many variables. But it's absolutely a fair question. Why are we here?
Why are we here, Braxton?
Which is the money question, which is we realistically would expect to achieve a savings of $80,000.
But it's not going to take away our overtime.
No, ma'am, we're still going to have overtime. What we want to do is to help manage that, reduce that amount of overtime, and certainly, as Kim had indicated in her talk, part of that is employee safety, and part of that is fiscal responsibility as managers.
Well, I mean, I would hope right now we're not leaving somebody out there all night, right? We are?
There are many, many times where the guys are working literally all night.
Order. I'm sorry, Braxton. Say that again.
There are many times where the guys are literally working all night. We get into heavy breaks where we have, say, 8 to 10 breaks going at one time. We'll have those two crews, and they're literally like vampires. They show up at 3 o'clock, and then they work all night long. They go home at 7 a.m., and they get some sleep, and then they're back at 3 o'clock.
So if we do get a second shift, how are we going to determine who works the second shift and who works the first shift?
That's a great question, and the discussions that we had with the bargaining unit were to use the primary call list, because we already have a well-established primary call list. Those are published at the beginning of the year, so that you know what your call is going to be for that entire year. so you can make plans around that. So that's what we would use as the genesis for second shift. You're on primary call, that means you've got second shift if second shift gets implemented that week. And then because you're on the primary call, it's also very logical that if you have to hold over, if you have to work breaks in the middle of the night, you're coming off of that primary list.
Are we going to lose employees because of this?
Well, I will let the bargaining unit voice their opinion on that. I think that what we've put out here is a fair and reasonable compromise. We're looking at 6 months of the year, and then as I have stated, if we don't have breaks rolling, that we need everyone, then what I want to see is everyone show back up at 7 o'clock in the morning, because that's when I'm going to get the most benefit by having all those employees out there. It gives me the greatest flexibility in terms of how I assign people. And if I don't really want to have a whole lot of hydrant flushing, and I don't want to have a lot of people cutting out and installing new hydrants in that second shift time, because they're going to be putting people out of water. Because when you're at home at 5 o'clock, the last thing in the world you want is to go turn on your tap and find out there's no water because there's a crew down the street exercising valves or deciding that they needed to cut in a new hydrant leak. Now, if there's a break, that's different. If there's a break, that's an emergency. We have to respond. We have to shut that line down to be able for our crews to get in and repair that break safely.
Thank you, Mr. Copley. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councilman Padilla.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. Braxton, you mentioned if you're on the primary call list, that's how it will be determined who gets second shift?
Correct.
So everybody will eventually get an opportunity to work that second shift if they wish. I mean,
Well, even if they don't wish, they're likely going to get an opportunity to work that.
I know in some agencies, if there's overtime available, they put out a list. You want to work it, you get to work it, so you can put in a little extra time and make some extra money. But not everybody wants to work a second shift. But in this case, everybody will have that obligation to work that second shift if necessary.
Correct, and I would say
Okay.
opportunity. I'm sure that members of the bargaining unit would use the word obligation, but yes, everyone will have that chance to work second shift.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. A question, I think, for Ms. Seaton. The study that was done, who commissioned the study?
That was actually a requirement contained in the previous collective bargaining agreement that a wage study would be done. And so the city put out an RFP for that with some input from the union on some parameters, and ultimately the Austin Peters Group was selected.
Okay, so the city was the one who set the parameters for what the study was supposed to contain?
Right. As to a wage study, those are historically looking at base wage rates. That's the type of wage study that's commonly conducted.
Okay, and I know you probably had no part in this, so don't take this personally, please, but I guess I'm disappointed that the city would hire someone to do a study, then they get the results, and then they say they didn't do the study right, or they didn't include a lot of things in this study, and if we're the ones putting out that study, how come they don't give us exactly what we're asking for?
Sure, and as you can see, Jackie's come up behind me because she's the one that was responsible for implementing that process.
So a bit of clarification, the scope of work that we put out, the union did have input into that, and it's absolutely correct that generally the wage studies are base hourly rate of pay. And we did only ask Austin Peters to do that. That is not what was of question, and there were a lot of clarifications that went back and forth. The union was able to submit questions that we got clarification. It was more in trying to understand the methodology that was used in the resulting study and some of the things. For example, she would the study would say that there's a salary midpoint, but it didn't equate to the midpoint of our our pay matrix, because we have a 20-step matrix. So there was clarification, and it wasn't really clear on how she arrived at some of the determinations in the study, even after we asked for a lot of clarification. Some of the differences that were not taken into account are the shift differential and when that applies. The standby works differently at different organizations, but to be very clear, we did not ask for that type of study, but what we are trying to do is then look at all of the components that are contained within our bargaining unit and then determine whether or not when you take all of those into account, is it a comparable wage compared to similar organizations? Some of our peer organizations don't have standby because they have emergency crews that have a set schedule that does not rotate. So that's an example of an enhancement and that makes it not a true apples to apples comparison when we do deal with the base rate of pay.
Yes, absolutely, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you for that. Again, I guess the very difficult position I think it puts us in is that we're presented with a study, and the study says 4 to 27%. And we commission that study, and then we come up and we're hearing, let's not really look at that, it doesn't need to be that much. It didn't take into account, A, B, C, D, and I'm wondering why didn't it? And if I guess maybe if I heard you correctly, that'd be difficult to do, but these guys sitting out here do difficult things all the time, and we don't, you just have to do those things. Sorry, I wasn't planning.
And it wasn't that at all. It was a typical wage study. However, the survey that is used is comparing work responsibilities, minimum qualifications to the labor market, the comparable labor market. And that is the majority factor in a comparable wage. But there's always, in any wage study, we're not saying it was a poor wage study or that it wasn't accurate, but in the compensation world, that's kind of the basis, and then we try to compare the other ancillary things that organizations have as components of their pay. But it's not typical that a compensation consultant does that on an organization's behalf.
Okay, one different question is, while we were negotiating, Ms. Seaton indicated that we started negotiations in the fall of 2017. During those negotiations and through 2018, were members of the union, were they led to believe that they'd be getting a raise for 2018? I mean, was there any promises, I guess, implicit promises made that would happen?
I wouldn't say that there was implicit promises. We always try to start the negotiations. The goal is to start the negotiations before the budget is set for the year of the contract term. So we would have started the process, and this one did get started late because of some issues with there was not a regional rep in place for the union, and so there was a delay in starting the negotiations because they needed some representation and support. But always with every bargaining unit, we typically start April, May, with the intention of being done by August when the budget is set for the upcoming year. So there was no promise made, but in practice, that is the goal, that it is done before the budget is set for the year of the contract term.
Thank you.
Jackie, could I ask you a question? If it serves me right, is this the same firm that we utilized several years ago so that we could do adjustments to the executive team salary?
It is not. That firm did not respond to the RFP for this particular project. This firm, Austin Peters Group, did this for the Water ASME and the Water Development Services in 2017. It is a different firm, and the methodology is just a little different.
But at that time, if I recall correctly, when we were presented with the fact that our team that was working, that was exempt, was not up to market, we did a fair adjustment to market at that point in time for our executive employees.
We did to a certain, and we went to the 90% is the practice because of just being conservative but wanting to pay a competitive wage. Yes, 90% of market.
Thank you very much. Councilman Lesser.
What was roughly the cost of the study?
The study cost, I don't have that with me. I believe it was around $10,000.
$10,000. Is there a reason why we don't have a representative here for either side in regards to the wage study from the Peters Group to answer questions in regards to the validity of this study?
The study was completed in 2017, so it's been a completed project, and as I said, there's no reason, I don't think, that we anticipated a need. Throughout the negotiations, we did have communication with the consultant to clarify all of the questions that the union presented forward, as well as questions that management had. So the consultant did remain engaged for a period of time and provided answers to all of the questions that both management and the union brought forth during the time that we were actively working during negotiations on the study.
Do we not have granted there would have to be some agreement in regards to the union representation and city representation, but I'm just curious, for an expenditure like that, is the best that you can hope for is a 25% spread? I mean, we basically paid for an average 0 to 25%, somewhere in there. I mean,
I would tell you, prior to having this study done by the third party, there was a joint union and management study that was done, I believe, in 2010 through 2012. And it was at the request that there was not, I guess, good trust on the sides of everyone that it was a sound study. So that's why we went with the third party.
did we attempt to go back to this group to ask them to see if they could adjust any of their study in regards to the additional information that we needed to be put in there?
We did not ask for things beyond the base wage, but we did ask clarification on why certain positions were determined to be comparable to city positions. We asked questions on the methodology that was used. We asked clarification on whether some of the positions, it appeared, may have been management positions versus non-management positions. So those were the sorts of clarifying questions that came both from the city management team as well as the union representatives.
Do you not think that it would have been more diligent to follow up on those questions in regards to knowing that we're going to have some type of differences and some type of disagreement in regards to the information between the union and the city? I'm not quite understanding why we would approach to have a study done that we know we have a contentious situation in between the two parties and not making sure that we're getting exactly what it is that we're asking for. I mean, it's kind of like saying we're going to go get this base wage study. We know it's not all exactly what we want, and we're going to wait for 2 years to sit up here and let somebody else take it apart. I mean, because that's kind of where we're at.
So a couple of things. There was no anticipation of issues like this because even the last internal study that the union and management worked on jointly was the same type of study, base hourly rate of pay. So we would not have anticipated that there would be an issue with this type of study because it was the same that we had done previously. And prior to the RFP, the union had input on the scope of work. So
yet at the same time, you just came up here and told us that the examples of what was not included in there and the problems that caused and why this study is not right. So what you're coming up here now is telling me we have a study, but here's the reasons you shouldn't take this study for as it's written, but you didn't anticipate that those were going to be issues. I
have not said that this, I'm sorry, I thought you were.
No, that's what you said.
No, I didn't say that it was not right. I said that was just a component of it.
I thought part of the reason that you were up here was you were saying that this study isn't accurate because of the different reasons that you gave us. Why it's not. You said the base study is accurate, correct? Okay, you believe the base study was accurate, correct?
Yes, and that's a component of the compensation
Right,
for our
but then there's these
employees.
other issues that you say we need to take into consideration of why that's not exactly the way the study should be interpreted, correct?
No, I said that the base rate of pay is the majority basis for looking at comparability in the market, is what I believe I said.
Well, I guess then
The
I'm really
majority
confused.
basis.
Are you
If
done?
I can ask Councilman Emerson, can you repeat what your question was? I thought you had a similar question in regards to which maybe I didn't hear correctly.
Councilman
If I may.
Emerson, you may repeat your question.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilman Lesser, I had basically the same thought that if we knew what the outstanding items, the enhancements that weren't included in that study, I wish we would have at the time asked them to value those enhancements so that we could have an apples to apples study. So then, then when you guys are saying it should be 11.5%, then we know, okay, that's right because that's backed up by the study, or it's not right, it should be 15 or 17.
One of the, if,
Councilman Lesser, would you be okay if she responds, or?
I'd like to, I was responded. So that's where I'm going to the question that you asked him earlier, and you responded to that with the reasons of why it was a base study within these other outside items that we needed to take in consideration, correct?
that is a component of the pay. If I could add some clarification, we in no way were intending to say that 11.5% was absolute comparable for this union over the 3-year period. There's a balance of being fiscally responsible. The other large factor is that there's a lot of overtime with this bargaining unit, and so one of the things that we were trying to do is see if the efficiencies based on a second shift, when people are working more of a truer straight time, that will help us determine how far out of comparable we are, because we don't have a good baseline because of the amount of overtime that's part of the annual wages of this employee group. So trying to be fiscally conservative, trying to balance that with comparability and organizational efficiencies, those are all components that we're trying to manage and still pay a fair wage.
I think we had Councilman Padilla waiting.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Councilman Jensen to be followed by the Deputy Mayor.
Two curveballs for you. So granted, the 11.5% gets approved for the base wage. Where does that put them in a scale of 0 to 100? And then just for base wage, and then what, given that same 11.5% approved with the entire compensation package, where does that put them in a 0 to 100 scale in terms of comparability?
So I would tell you that generally each classification is a different percentage compared to the market, and so during negotiations we did focus on across-the-board increases. Early on we did have a proposal. One of the things that the study notes is that we have more levels in our classifications than many of the comparable organizations. We had an early proposal to try to combine the utility system worker 2 and the utility system worker 3 classifications. The union was a bit hesitant. Management we pulled that proposal. So there are other things besides base rate of pay that make this a challenging study that we, in the interest of trying to have the negotiations progress, we ended up not working on individual classifications and trying to reduce levels. We felt that that's something that we could come back to when we try to implement competency-based pay, as we have in many of our other bargaining units. So there's several complex structural things that made it different than many of our peer organizations that we did only have across-the-board proposals later in the negotiations that we went back and forth with.
So on average, where are we at then in terms of comparability?
With our proposal or based on the study compared to current wages?
The study doesn't matter, just the 11.5% as a base wage, and then our total compensation package.
If I had to just take a guess, I would say if you looked at our total compensation package with the 11.5%, that would probably get us in the ballpark of 5 to 8% below market on average for the classifications.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Good question. I did have, okay, you said the difference were the add-ons, shift differential, yada yada, certificates, and something else classifications. Does that apply to every single worker, or is that just a few of them?
So the shift differential applies to primarily the plant operators, those that work outside of any shift, I believe, that starts after 2 o'clock. I've got my contract back there. But it applies if you have a late start time. And then the standby is divided the 24-hour day into 3 8-hour segments, and it's 1 hour at your regular rate of pay per 8-hour segment. So that can be up to 3 hours a day of additional pay for standby. And you're generally on standby for a week. So that's another factor that, and there's a published schedule of when you would be scheduled for standby. So those are the sorts of, some of the peer organizations don't have standby because they run second crews in night and the weekends, and that's a standard shift for them. So that's an extra, if we say up to 3 hours a day at your regular base rate of pay, that's factored into our compensation, but's not comparable with some of the structure of other peer organizations as one example to try to explain some of those differences.
Okay, this is just my brain here. You're going to have to go with me. Okay, so to me, the way I think about the study is you have like a grape, an apple, an orange, and a plum, and you're trying to say what's alike. Okay, so they all have a seed. Now, however, now you also have to take into consideration the taste, the texture, the color, and maybe this city doesn't have it, maybe this city does. And so to get that kind of study, would it even be possible? I mean, you take the base, and then you can tell us what you add on to it.
And that's why I said that it's the base rate of pay is what typical comparability studies look at, and it is a majority factor in determining comparable wages, but not the only factor. That's exactly what I was trying to explain.
Okay, and if I can ask Nick, if we retroed back the overtime, and I don't know if you said this, did you say 50,000?
Yes.
Okay. Because that's what they were missing, was the overtime being retroactive.
Yeah, so if the overtime was retroactive to 2018, there was, just looking back, there's about 600,000 in overtime in 2018. If you applied the pay matrix increase to that, you'd get around between 40 and 50,000. There are other factors that that's including overtime potential.
What did you do? Okay. So could it be possible to not retroactive the base, but retroactive just the OT?
I'm not confident in that response. But
Overtime is I think that would get us into some FLSA concerns because overtime by law is 1.5% of your base hourly rate of pay, so that would not probably be a compliant thing to consider.
Why? If you raise the base salary of pay and then added the overtime,
Because that would not have been the base rate of pay at the time the overtime was earned. So arguably, if it was higher, then the base rate of pay should have been at that 2018 rate.
So to get that overtime, you'd have to retroactive all of it? Is
That
what
would
you're
be the
saying?
compliant thing
Okay.
to do.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Jensen, to be followed by Councilman Padilla.
So I'm not entirely sure who my question is for. It may be for Braxton. Generally, in the private sector, and I realize this isn't the private sector, but normally, when you give employees a raise, it's because you're recognizing that they have longevity and the efficiency outside of cost of living increases, obviously. They're going to be more efficient in completing the task and able to take on more work because they have the experience now. They know how to do things. They should be better at it. So I'm curious, for any investment we make in terms of higher wages, what can we expect to get back in terms of better efficiency and higher capacity? And fair warning, I'm going to ask the union the exact same question.
No, I think it's a very good question. Basically, inherent in the wage pay scale or the wage matrix is the step increases. The step increase is entitled to provide an incentive to employees because as they have more time in the job, they're becoming more adept in it. Certainly from management's perspective, I would like to see a competency-based pay plan, basically to lay out competencies that my individuals at each level need to achieve. I think it's the fairest way to do it. To me, it's performance-based, and that gives employees that have motivation, have that skill set, to basically control their own development. So instead of having to wait 3 years and 3 months before they can be promoted in the contract into Utility Service Worker 3, it would give someone who can demonstrate those competencies. We did attempt to propose language that basically said union and management will mutually agree to work on developing a competency-based pay plan. The union was not agreeable to even that soft sell language to do it, so that I look at it as management will look at what competencies can we develop for our positions.
So right now, we should not expect any kind of increased in efficiency for the increase in pay we're giving them now. Is that my understanding?
Other than my initial comment, which was inherently based in that matrix, is step based on longevity of an employee, and as employees develop, they gather that skill set.
Do any of our business analytics up to now show that our department is becoming more efficient as our folks become more skilled? Are we able to handle more breaks and take on more responsibility?
We have not fine-tuned any of our performance measures to be able to dive into that and to be able to prove that up.
Okay. When could we expect to have that? And I realize it may be years, don't get me wrong, but like in the next contract, will we be able to look at efficiency based on longevity and pay and determine whether or not?
I'm not going to sit here and give you an answer that I have absolutely no idea on. I think that is an absolute fair question, and we will take a look into that. Okay. And that's as good as I can do right now.
As the management team, I would expect you to want that information, so I'm a little disheartened that you don't even seem to indicate that you want to make sure that we're gaining in efficiency. I mean, the whole idea in paying people more for longevity is that we don't have to train new people to do the same task again and again, that we have seasoned employees that know how to do it. And that's the advantage in paying them more. So am I not understanding that correct? And I mean, how do we know whether or not our department is efficient now?
We are still in early stages of developing true, meaningful performance measures. A lot of what we inherited were statistics, not performance measures. We're still in early stages of developing those.
Okay, that has been done.
The questions that you're asking is taking that basic performance measures and fine-tuning and taking it to the next level. I think it's an absolute fair question. I think it's a fair challenge to the management staff to look at that.
Excellent. I appreciate you doing so. Thank you.
I'm going to take the chair's privilege really quick here, and I'm going to say, I think that when you talk about efficiency, I would make you look at the fact that with the same amount of people, we handled 400 one year and 800 breaks the other.
And that's exactly what I'm looking for, yes.
Councilman Paella.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I won't belabor it. We've all talked a little bit about the study and so forth. I've been through those kinds of studies as a full-time city employee. Just like Councilwoman Clear vividly described it, there's just no way to come up with a study that matches exactly what you have in your city. There are just too many variables. There are too many specialties, certificates, performance levels, all those kinds of things come into play, and you have to start somewhere. And I think you started at the base where you needed to. And Jackie, I think you've done a good job of explaining that to us. We can get lost in the weeds, I believe. But I think from listening to everything I have heard tonight, I appreciate, much like Councilman Emerson has said, these city employees do an amazing job. I've seen them out there in bad weather, digging holes. I wouldn't want to do it. I did it for a short time and thought, well, that's not my way to go. But I do think that the city has been fair in listening to what they can do in a fair way to start the process of performance-based increases and bringing us closer to where we need to be. I don't think in any contract negotiation that we have had for the city that we've jumped right up to where everybody wants to be. We have to work to get to that point, and I think this is a good start. For me, I think that you've given me enough information to, unless there's someone else who wants to make comment, I'm ready to make a motion to accept.
Council member, at this point in time, we still need to hear from the union. After we hear from the union, we will hear from the public comment. After the public comment, we will open it to a public hearing so that any individual that wishes to speak can speak. And then after that, we can proceed with motion making.
Okay. We're getting around
That's a break. Oh, yes. Councilman Lesser. And there will be a break around 8 o'clock.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My next question is, will we have the opportunity to ask representatives other questions in the future? And if that is the case, I would say, can we proceed now with listening to the union's
Absolutely. The
side
answer
of it,
is
so we
yes.
can then get back to that. Thank you.
So understanding that more than likely that presentation is going to take 30 minutes, I'm just setting up for how this is going to go. We will more than likely hear the presentation of the union and then recess into a break and then start with the conversation and the questions again, if that's amicable for the body. Okay. Do you need the break now?
Yeah, it looks like.
Let's take a break now. Okay, so why don't we take a 5-minute recess, and we should be back at 7:45. No, thank you.